The most recent job that I lost wasn't a senior position. Because of that, there were some architectural meetings that I couldn't attend. I wasn't invited to them. At that point in my career, I had 11 years of experience as a software engineer. Because of the interview process, the memory of my expertise was distributed across multiple team members. Some of the team members that I interviewed, pardon, some of the team members that interviewed me weren't working with me. Some others had left the company by the time I had been fired. This pattern of organization specifically doesn't work. It burns people out and increases organizational distrust. This is why the build in public movement is catching wind. Gaining steam? I missed the metaphor there. Picking up pace. One of the secrets of the software engineering career is that we stop writing the code that's boring. We stop writing the code that's very boring, I should say. Some code seems like it's more boring than other code, but for the most part, we find solutions that work and then follow the next most difficult problems to solve. And if there aren't any more interesting, difficult problems to solve, usually we stop being software engineers. Sometimes what this means is a lot of people write tutorials about the stuff they find interesting and then stop finding that stuff interesting and stop writing about it. It's less interesting to read somebody navigating a solved problem sometimes than it is to discover the ability to navigate challenge in the context of software engineering skill development. So the kinds of people who want to be software engineers will be able to read someone navigating a solved problem and wonder what else there is. This is why it's necessary for experienced software engineers to be patient for people who are learning how to solve their own problems. Also, why it's necessary for experienced software engineers to provide spaces where people can explore the kinds of problems that are interesting to solve for the first time. My recommendation for most software engineering teams is that they curricularize a part of their code base. Try to make it possible for anybody to learn how to become a developer with that code base. They should be able to leave, contribute to another team, and then return to old colleagues in the future. Aim to write code developers want to return to. Cheers. I don't know who needs to hear this, but if it isn't possible for Dr. Seuss or Willy Wonka to exist, then we haven't reached AGI. Before I started making videos for TikTok, I made videos for YouTube. My goal for making videos was to practice the medium. I wanted to make my videos accessible, and I liked TikTok's captions better. I liked TikTok's captions more, and I thought TikTok's captions were better. The timing and accuracy stood out. Now I appreciate CapCut for style. At different companies, different people are going to become attached to the code for different reasons. This attachment doesn't necessarily have to, it doesn't need to have any basis in any qualities about the code. They might describe wanting to not change the code that much, and the reason they don't want the code to change don't need to have any direct correlation to anything about the code. It's helpful to have a culture of demonstration, and also it's helpful to be mindful of long-term implications of demonstration. So contexts where we can demonstrate optimism and engagement ideally would connect to further development opportunities. It's also important to be mindful of negative sentiment that can't or won't be communicated. So here, it's important to be mindful of the surface area of consensual and earnest feedback, and also it's important to consider what that means in multi-party systems. Some modern media, when used correctly, can aid in navigating complex dynamics within these systems. Different people are going to have different fluencies and different biases with different systems. Sometimes it is helpful to construct your own play area, and sometimes it is helpful to consult a third party. Here, it's worth minding the context of development and the context of continuity. And this aligns with modern discussions about proof of work and proof of stakes. Software engineering is kind of like having conversations with the bottles that contain potions, and learning that different potions fit differently in different bottles. Also, living in a world where different problems pop up because of whatever, and some of these problems are solvable by some of these potions. There are a lot of gaps between somebody having a specific problem and having access to a specific potion. Timing understanding can be difficult. Relationship to systems can be varied. Everyone will approach learning systems differently. Software development life cycles tend to be describable. Describable systems can be documented. Some documentation can be interpreted. Some systems are easy to understand without documentation. Some systems integrate description as a learning process alongside engagement. Prompt engineering relates more to engagement. Software engineering relates more to context. Context engineering is emerging as a bit of a front-end editing kind of role. Prompt engineering is a task that someone's role might have as a job. I've been developing a language that's useful for prompt engineering. It's called Swoop. One of my goals when I make videos is to present a novel context for ideas. I'd like to challenge myself to explore new contexts, and with this invite people to explore the reasons why media are created. One of the reasons that I create for TikTok is to make sure that I'm creating more than I'm consuming. And with this practice, I develop new relationships to ideas. Now we exist in a context where the things that we describe can be automated in the context of introducing new ideas to new people. We've existed in algorithmic silos that have given us access to a lot of quality, and every new concept we represent to a new person, is the first time they experience the novelty, and the dimensions of sustaining that novelty are new enough to us that the breadth of etc. What I'm saying is now is a good time to invent a genre and practice expressing an idea in real time in the media that you have access to. Explore that across a couple dimensions. More people are going to relate to play than they are going to relate to work. Although it seems like work should be the thing that people reward you for whatever you do if they pay you in a lot of people's minds. I'd like to be mindful and work against a culture of complaining, although sometimes complaining is an expression of a reality. So I do wonder about descriptions of work and how to make those transparent while also minding that complaining is a dimension of some realities. I'm a software engineer. You can hire me as a web developer. Cheers. If you get hired as a software engineer, then you can call yourself a software engineer. Depending on organizational rhythm, different titles can carry different meanings for different contexts of development. Outside of the engineering development journey, you might develop in other ways. If you take some time to specifically bridge the gaps between your engineering development and the development that's more domain specific in another area of interest, then you might be able to describe consistently a new emerging domain of development. What am I saying? Terms are allowed to have no meaning, and they're also allowed to have relative meaning, and software engineering as a discipline provides a lot of surface area for relative meaning to exist. Presumably, spending several years considering the concept of software development and exploring multiple different languages and getting deep enough in those languages to get hired would provide someone with enough relative language to consider engineering as a concept philosophically. Many disciplines are actually games in escaping nihilism, and being able to describe a reason for spending multiple years exploring language is a reason why nihilism might be escaped for at least that amount of time. There is a significant challenge in describing a reason to not automate most things that you now have language to describe. There is a convenient word called art that has also been devalued that is not very easy to use to consistently communicate anything consistent, other than its own concept. There is another word called design that describes a relation to process and intent towards understanding. Presumably, designed concepts would be understood by the intended audience. Perhaps art inspires wonder in its intended audience. Engineering is the application of design to a problem space. Business is a cultural tradition associating problem solving with social context. A company that consistently improves business, engineering, and design. A company that does those things can do those things. You can describe this on TikTok and X. Blue Sky might be useful for conversation. If you're a software engineer, something that you should know is that a lot of business owners believe the people who buy their product have the same relationship to software that they do, or just technology in general. Paper is a technology. Communication technologies are technologies. Business owners sometimes have different relationships with data as well. Some patterns of business change significantly depending on the communication media that we have access to. Now, one of the communication mediums, now it's possible to send somebody a link of a ChatGPT conversation. Then they can communicate with a system that can speak English, whatever that means for believability. Some systems might be more or less believable when they feel more or less human. Painting is one way to practice relating to human time. Some painters are inspired by renditions of their art. Other painters are distracted by renditions of their art. Some image generators provide room for style. Your style is yours if it tells your story. Helpful stories are helpful. I majored in learning. My major in college was learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science. I've mentioned that before. Cheers. I got accepted into the only university that I wanted to attend, but I didn't get into the major that I wanted to. I applied for electrical and computer engineering, but I got into the Division of General Studies as an undeclared major. It turns out this worked out well in the grand scheme of things because while I was trying to get into electrical and computer engineering, I actually tried. Like the classes that I took, I actually tried to understand the material well enough to be able to apply it to the next class. I appreciate that I also eventually majored in learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science because while the electrical and computer engineering curriculum was still fresh on my mind, I was able to reflect on why each course was constructed the ways that it was. Then I had conversations with faculty and staff members and different just different people, students and townies, professors and grad students, different kinds of grad students. That was interesting because different people had different reasons for studying something for a long time. And I think it's cool now because, well, with just where I've gotten with the different domains and the people who I've met who carry different dimensions of description, I think that it's pretty cool because having conversations with a new person about something they've studied for a long time always introduces a new dimension to a world that I'm exploring. And that's been really helpful for pacing. I want to be able to say things like using AI is a lot less electricity and water than producing a car and driving to work. And that's probably true for most people, although there are ways to let that calculation go unbounded and people just use up whatever for whatever. So I also appreciate that listening to another person describe something they've studied is a natural rate limit to anything that I can generate. And I appreciate having gone to college because I've met hundreds of people who I can have conversations with. Some whom I went to high school with some of them. That's cool to reflect on too. Cheers. Along the course of my skill development, either I or my peers experienced something very challenging that wasn't helpful for whatever we were learning. And it is possible to describe the ways that we navigated those experiences towards becoming who we are specifically today. It has taken me some time to find language for the constructive challenges. Also to ground the relevance of the challenge with a context for development without being dragged down by the other negative challenges that I had around me. It's strange because the ways that I process this can be summarized in the videos that I post, and communicating specifically why it felt some kind of way for something to happen isn't necessarily the best way to communicate to someone how they can move forward. I have been tested enough where people wonder if I've experienced hardship enough and I don't like those conversations. And sometimes it sets the tone for the relationship. So with the videos that I've made on TikTok, I know that I've made thousands of videos for TikTok and hundreds of videos for YouTube. I know that I've made thousands of posts on Instagram, at least thousands of reposts, hundreds of tweets. I think a few hundred posts on Blue Sky. I hope I've been describing the ways that I practice and the ways that I pursue novelty outside of redundancy in a context where it is possible to burn out of novelty. I've been a software engineer for 14 years, so I can say that I have described 14 years of discovery. I spent the past 2 years making sure there would be at least 2 years of intent behind making 14 years last 2 years. And I've described how I do that to other people who can extend the space and make sure there is entertainment that is aligned with development and discovery, with respect to what that can mean and the contexts that we can access at different times. I appreciate working with authors who can describe how to access imaginative spaces that extend beyond what we are currently bound by. I appreciate being able to create and explore fantasy realms. Every team that hires software engineers is going to be different. There might be different dynamics that put software engineers on different teams at different times. This makes it challenging to describe anything consistent about software engineering as a career, especially because there are new and emerging tools for creating code, and the reason that software engineers exist is because of why people care about code and the practices around it. So the profession is extraordinarily sensitive to modern technology. Computer science is different than software engineering. Computer scientists are more likely to have studied the math and theory behind software engineering. Computer engineering is different than computer science. Computer engineering is more similar to electrical engineering. Electrical engineering deals with the applied physics of electricity. Computer engineering deals with the applied physics of computation. Engineering involves math. Technician roles might exist without requiring math skills. Technician roles are different than engineering roles. If you like programming, study computer science to be a software engineer. If you like physics, study electrical engineering to be a software engineer. If you like computer magic, study computer engineering. Technician roles depend more on who teaches you, but if you like technology and aren't as strong with math, then these are an option. Ideally, engineering schools would include hands-on components. Technician schools tend to include more hands-on components, from what I hear. I pursued engineering for half of college and then education for the other half of college. Electrical engineering, then learning and education studies with a concentration in applied learning science. I wonder if there's education engineering. I'm curious about formalizing prompt engineering as a branch of research into SWOOP. Swoop is a language that I've been developing since college. Started fiddling with parsers about 7 years ago at that. There's an old version of my parser on GitHub. I've made at least one video about that on YouTube. I know I've talked about it a few times on TikTok. I'm exploring experimental development on X. I might start posting release notes on Blue Sky. That's just a project I'm working on the side. Actually, is it my main project now? It organizes my professional conversations. Develop a project over time and describe it. Talk about it with others, see if they can improvise with it. If someone else can coherently navigate a space with millions of options, then you know that you've gotten something coherent. At least enough for that. Cheers.